The early mornings in the old boarding house always carried the damp odor of walls that never truly dried out, but Aaron had gotten used to it ages ago. He sat at the rickety wooden table, setting a cup of cheap coffee down, and reviewing the notes in his worn-out journal. Today wasn't just another day. Today was his chance to step back into the world he once belonged to, a professional engineering gig, right up his alley. Exactly what his heart had shelved for 2 long years. Lila woke up, her soft, messy hair spilling over her shoulders, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but sparkling with the familiar eagerness she displayed whenever she saw her dad preparing his documents. She dragged a chair up beside Aaron, resting her chin on her hand as she watched him secure the stack of papers with a rubber band. "Going on another interview, Dad?" she asked, not with worry, but with the pure, unshakable faith of a kid who always believed her father would be all right. Aaron just nodded. He didn't want to say too much, afraid he'd set expectations only to watch them crash. But when Lila smiled and put her hand on his shoulder, his heart softened in a way nothing else could achieve. She was the reason he kept hustling every single day, the anchor that kept him from sinking into the dark abyss of those lonely months. After fixing a simple breakfast, Aaron helped his daughter tie her laces and walked Lila over to the neighbor's place. She darted back to hug him tight before going inside. "Don't be late to pick me up, okay, Dad?" Aaron chuckled softly, ruffled her hair, and headed to his ride. Even though his beat-up motorcycle made a racket nobody wanted to hear on a quiet morning, he rode it with complete confidence. Everything had to be spot on today. He'd rehearsed for the interview all week. He'd timed the route to avoid gridlock. He'd ironed his dress shirt meticulously, focusing on the collar, the spot that usually gave away a sleep-deprived person's messiness. He aimed for perfection. The city woke up in an atmosphere that Aaron found both familiar and strangely distant. The traffic flowed like a steady heartbeat, car horns blaring, the scent of fresh bread from the pushcarts, the rust chatter of commuters. Aaron weaved his bike through the lanes, feeling something shifting inside his chest. Not quite nervousness, more like a door he thought was locked forever was slowly creaking open. As he stopped at a traffic signal, Aaron looked up at the towering glass high-rises. He used to work in a building just like one of those. He'd step into the sleek elevators with the posture of a man who knew his stuff, a man who had a bright future. Then, his life took a sharp detour overnight. His wife's passing shattered every plan. He didn't want Lila passed around to different caregivers. He chose to step away from his field, to exit the rat race he no longer had the strength to navigate. But for the past 2 years, every notification about new tech, every software update bulletin, every security patch change jolted him. His hands remembered the work, and his heart couldn't let it go. Today, he was making his way back. Not to regain his reputation or prove a point, but simply to secure a better life for his daughter. That realization made him grip the handlebars tighter and accelerate the moment the light turned green. The cityscape in the early morning had a unique beauty, though Aaron wasn't exactly in the mood to appreciate it. Some stretches of the road were still wet, but the sun was beginning to flood the glass panels, creating a shimmering metallic reflection. Aaron envisioned the moment he'd step into the interview building, ponder the hiring manager's inevitable questions, and considered how he'd frame his experience. A fragile thread of hope wove its way into his chest. If things went well today, maybe he could move Lila to a better school, get them into a brighter apartment, or even just afford that robotics kit she'd been eyeing for a month. The old bike vibrated slightly as Aaron accelerated onto the busy street. His shirt pulled taut across his shoulders as he leaned down to minimize wind resistance. The engine noise blended with the sounds of the city, making him feel like he was genuinely stepping back into life. It had been a long time since he'd stood in the shoes of an engineer, not because he'd lost his skill, but because he feared he'd lost his nerve. But this morning, that feeling was fading. On the final stretch of his journey, Aaron zoomed through a wide intersection flanked by skyscrapers. He watched the countdown timer on the traffic light, feeling close to touching a new chapter. Something was unfolding for him, settling in like the light breeze passing through the heavy traffic flow.
The city had those mornings that made people believe they were about to grasp something good. Aaron believed it too, until the moment he rode toward the downtown area where his heart quietly pulsed with anticipation. On his watch face, the second hand slid past small markers, reminding him that time was on his side, at least for now. Ahead, the building he was headed for gradually materialized, gleaming in the morning light. That was his destination, the place where life might take a completely different turn. Aaron tightened his grip on the handlebars, adjusted his speed, and kept his bike straight in his lane. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. He had prepared, he had hoped, and he had waited long enough for this moment to know that if the chance opened up, he wouldn't let it slip away. But just as he approached the major intersection, the one every city resident had to navigate to get downtown, a loud metallic noise echoed from up ahead, pulling Aaron back to reality. The sound resonated like a signal of impending change. Aaron leaned forward, realizing the traffic flow was moving erratically. Several vehicles slammed on their brakes to avoid something in the middle of the crossing. He instinctively eased off the throttle, squinting his eyes to see clearly. A luxury vehicle was angled awkwardly on the pavement, its driver's side door slightly ajar, and the figure of a woman was stumbling out. Aaron frowned momentarily. Something urged him to slow down, even though his watch signaled he should keep moving if he wanted to arrive on time. But in that instant, he only heard his heart urging him toward the action he'd taken ever since his wife passed, helping those in need.
The stream of vehicles at the intersection this morning flowed like a relentless current. Aaron slowed down as he saw several cars ahead inching to the sides oddly, as if avoiding something lying in the middle of the road. From a distance, he recognized the front end of a sleek black sedan, heavily skewed towards the curb line, its headlights blinking faintly, and the windshield sporting a spiderweb of cracks. Next to the car, a woman was trying to step out, but her legs buckled the moment her feet hit the pavement. No one stopped. People glanced, then skirted around, treating it like just another unavoidable part of the city's busy traffic scene. A taxi impatiently blared its horn, cutting so close that Aaron thought it would clip the woman's arm. That triggered a surge of heat in his chest, the familiar, compelling urge he had never ignored. Aaron slammed on his brakes, the tires screeching sharply and abruptly on the pavement. He pulled over to the side, completely disregarding his tight schedule, and sprinted toward the sedan. The woman was clutching the edge of the door, her breathing shallow and ragged. When Aaron placed a hand on her shoulder to steady her, she flinched and stumbled another step. He managed to loop his arm around her back to keep her upright. She didn't speak, only struggled to hold onto him for balance. Aaron noticed her hand was unusually cold. Her right shoulder of her coat had a long scrape and was dusted with glass fragments. He quickly scanned the inside of the car, seeing a purse, laptop, and some documents scattered on the seat, a briefcase having fallen to the floor and slightly crushed under the pedals. Traffic kept speeding past so close that Aaron felt the rush of wind from the faster vehicles wash over his face. He gently helped the woman toward the sidewalk, settling her onto the lowest step of the curb. She raised her hand to her forehead, struggling to regulate her breathing. "Can you hear me?" Aaron crouched to her eye level. The woman nodded weakly, though her eyes were hazy, as if she were fighting to maintain focus. Aaron quickly checked for injuries. Her forehead was slightly bruised with a long scratch running down her temple. Her left leg was slightly tucked, likely banged hard against the door during the impact. When Aaron gently touched it, she winced but didn't protest. That told him the pain wasn't severe, but she shouldn't stand for long. He glanced back at the car, noticing a faint smell of fuel, not a major leak, but enough to keep him on edge. Aaron stood up and hurried back to the car, shutting off the engine that was still sputtering. He pulled the purse and laptop out of the seats to prevent any risk of a fire. He gathered all the scattered documents, then rushed back to the woman. She was trying to take deep breaths to compose herself, her hand trembling slightly as he handed her the purse. "Hold on to this. I'm calling for assistance." Aaron dialed, quickly relaying the location and the victim's condition. After hanging up, he looked at her again. She closed her eyes for a few seconds, then opened them, her eyes not exactly terrified, but showing the remnants of sudden shock. Another car flew by perilously close to the curb. Aaron put his hand out to signal them to slow down, but it was useless.
He stepped in front of her, shielding the space between her and the road, as if it were a reflex he had honed over years of protecting Leela from every minor hazard.
The woman looked up at his action and remained silent, but there was a subtle softening in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude. When the emergency medical team arrived, they asked a few questions, placed her on a soft stretcher, and secured her inside. She still held her purse tightly, gripping it like a familiar object to stay grounded. Before the doors closed, she looked at Aaron one more time, as if wanting to say something, but the moment passed. The doors shut, and the aid vehicles sped away, leaving a large void amid the city noises. Aaron stood still for a few seconds, taking a breath to regain his composure. He looked at the crumpled sedan, the traffic already surging around it, then glanced down at his watch. The minute hand had crossed the marker he dreaded. He hadn't even reached the building and was almost 15 minutes late. He walked back to his bike, started it up, and rode off. His heart pounded faster, not from worry for himself, but from the realization that all his hopes had been pushed back by a split-second decision. He didn't regret it, but that didn't make the road ahead feel any less heavy. When he reached the lobby of the interview building, Aaron quickly smoothed down his shirt and approached the reception desk. The young attendant looked at his file and shook her head. The interview slot was closed and couldn't be rescheduled. No one upstairs was available to consider his case. There was no apology, just procedure and timing. Aaron stood still for a moment, his hand lightly clenching his portfolio. Nothing could change the fact that he was late. He thanked the receptionist and turned to leave. Each step was light, but his heart grew heavier. Months of preparation, the small glimmer of hope for a new beginning, all seemed to dissolve like steam. He sat back on his bike, not starting it immediately. The city before him was just as bustling, as if no one had been injured at the intersection moments before. Aaron looked in the rearview mirror, noticing his face looked much more tired than it had that morning. But in a flash, he recalled the moment the woman almost collapsed on the street, her cold, trembling hand, and the look in her eyes before the aid vehicle doors closed. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't bring immediate reward. Sometimes it costs you what you were hoping for. But Aaron had never lived any other way. He knew that if he could go back, he would still pull over, and that was enough to make him breathe a little easier, a little slower. Aaron put on his helmet, started his bike, and rode back toward the boarding house district. Elise left the clinic in the late afternoon, the pale gray sunshine bright enough to reveal the faint scratches still lingering on her arm and forehead. Although the doctor confirmed she only had a minor concussion and some bruising, Elise felt an odd sense of imbalance, as if the morning's impact hadn't just twisted her car, but had thrown her life's rhythm off kilter until this very moment. The only person who kept things from getting much worse was the man whose name she hadn't had time to ask. In the instant the aid vehicle doors closed, Elise could still see his silhouette standing on the curb, holding her bag, his demeanor so calm that it seemed to shrink the surrounding chaos. Elise had met plenty of polite, brilliant, and astute people, but that specific composure, that decisiveness rooted in an instinct to assist without asking why, was something she rarely encountered in the calculating world she navigated. And that is what made her remember his face so clearly. Even sitting in her assistant's car, the image stuck to her like an unyielding thread. Elise returned to the office late that evening. The highest floors of the headquarters were still lit up, long after regular hours. The glass doors reflected her silhouette as she walked into the conference room where the tech team was waiting. The projector was on, displaying charts and statistics scrolling across the screen. The room was filled with the clatter of keyboards, the anxious sound of rushed breathing, and the thick aroma of coffee, all signs of stress that had been mounting for days. The tech lead stepped forward to explain the situation. For the past 2 weeks, the system had been plagued by unexpected data packets of unknown origin. Initially, they were too small to matter, but they grew steadily more frequent. All attempted diagnostics had failed to pinpoint the source. Elise listened to every word, her eyes fixed on the growing graph, which looked like an ink stain spreading across paper. A critical company project was at risk of a major data breach. This wouldn't just wreck the efforts of hundreds of employees, it would destroy her own position on the board. She felt her heart beat heavy and fast. From the morning's wreck to this high-stakes meeting, everything seemed to align, forcing her to confront it all at once. Elise took a deep breath, trying to suppress the feeling of disorientation she'd felt standing at the intersection, where she was completely alone until that man appeared. Despite the numerous issues before her, Aaron's image drifted into her mind. The way he shielded her from the traffic, the way he gathered every scattered document, the way he looked into her eyes to make sure she was okay. She hadn't even given him a proper thank you. She hadn't told him that because of him, she was able to stand here leading this crucial meeting. Elise stood up when the meeting adjourned, asking her assistant to stay behind. She spoke concisely, without long explanations. Her assistant understood immediately and opened her laptop, accessing the city's traffic data storage system. Elise leaned over the screen, her eyes glued to the footage as they reviewed the camera feed from the intersection. They zoomed in on the image of the man parking his old motorcycle and running to pull her away from the danger zone. His helmet obscured most of his face, but his stance and actions were clear. "Zoom in on the license plate," Elise commanded, her voice low but firm. The data was retrieved. Each character appeared clearly. The assistant cross-referenced the plate with the vehicle registration database. Just a few seconds later, a name appeared on the screen. Aaron Flynn. The address indicated a boarding house district 20 minutes outside of downtown.
Elise stood still for a few moments, then instructed her assistant to prepare the car. There was no reason for her to delay. When Elise arrived at the boarding house where Aaron and Leela lived, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to her high-rise office. The walls were stained and peeling, electric wires crisscrossed the hallway, and the scent of various cooking hung in the air. Elise walked down the narrow corridor, stopping at the door with a piece of paper stuck to it, denoting the room number. She knocked. Aaron opened the door, surprised. He was wearing a simple t-shirt, his hair still slightly dusty from the morning. Leela was sitting on the floor behind him, assembling Lego bricks into a small robot. Seeing Elise, the girl looked up, her eyes wide with curiosity. Aaron was momentarily awkward, recognizing the woman from the morning's accident standing at his door. Elise saw that, but she also noticed many other things. The small but tidy room, the corner desk with old engineering blueprints, an outdated but clean computer, and Leela's toys carefully arranged. It was simple but cozy, like someone's determined effort to preserve the value of family despite restricted circumstances. Elise skipped the small talk. She looked into Aaron's eyes, noticing the surprise mixed with fatigue from the long morning, and she understood. He had missed his interview because of the wreck. He might have secured a new opportunity, but it had vanished because he chose to save a stranger. A wave of guilt washed over Elise. For years running her company, she had never felt this level of personal accountability toward anyone outside of her employees. But with this man, it came naturally, a reaction she couldn't control. She told him she knew he had missed his interview because of the wreck. She told him that if he hadn't found the right position yet, she wanted him to undergo a technical evaluation at her company. It wasn't pity. It was a chance for him to demonstrate his true ability. Aaron stood still for a moment, as if trying to process what was happening. Leela looked from her father to Elise, not understanding the specifics, but sensing that something important was transpiring. Elise didn't wait for an answer. She simply said he didn't need to decide immediately, but if he accepted, she believed her company wouldn't let this opportunity slip away this time. When Elise left the boarding house, Aaron's gaze followed her to the end of the hallway. He didn't know what awaited him. Aaron arrived at the headquarters building the next morning with the mindset of someone who had just been given a chance, but wasn't entirely sure he deserved it. He stood in the lobby, looking up at the towering glass floors, feeling like he was facing a world he once belonged to, but had been separated from for too long. His hands were slightly cold as he stepped into the elevator. He took a deep breath as the doors closed, trying to keep his breathing steady. He had one thought in his mind. He had to do something, no matter how small, to prove he hadn't completely fallen behind during his time away from the industry.
Elise was waiting in the large conference room. She still had the serious demeanor typical of a CEO, but her gaze toward Aaron was softer, like trust placed in the right hands. Beside her was the tech team, faces strained from days of wrestling with an unidentifiable system flaw. The tech lead placed a stack of documents on the table, opened his laptop, and turned the screen toward Aaron. He pulled up a chair, sat down, straight-backed, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table to maintain his calm. Initially, he just looked. No rushed questions, no attempts to show off his knowledge. His old work habit returned, observing everything before touching it. The system logs were dense, with columns of numbers, timed down to the millisecond. Aaron flipped through a few pages, immediately understanding that the tech team had tried most conventional methods. The irregularities only appeared in small, rhythmic bursts, like a faint dot repeated at regular intervals. He looked at the simulated graph, a few faint lines that looked like thin, vibrating threads, but no one could explain them. Aaron remained silent, tracing his finger along the log lines. It felt like he was following the breath of something very skilled at hiding. After a few minutes, he pulled the laptop closer, expanding a section of code marked Driver Update. His eyes stopped when he saw an unusual process so small it seemed deliberately starved of attention. One beat, then another, then one more. He leaned in, a familiar sensation running down his spine. The cadence of that process wasn't typical system activity. It sounded exactly like a heartbeat. Aaron turned the screen toward the tech team, pointing at the code segment. "It's not hiding in the network system," he said softly. "It's nested beneath the peripheral device driver layer. Its activity pattern is perfectly regular, exactly like a pulse." The room went silent. The tech lead bent down to look. A young programmer exhaled sharply, as if finally seeing a long-lost puzzle piece. They immediately began reviewing the code line by line. Someone whispered that they had looked over this driver 3 times without finding anything. Elise looked at Aaron, her eyes showing genuine surprise and respect. She seemed to see the image of him at the intersection the day before, calm, sharp, and capable of reading what others missed. Just as they were delving deeper, the lights in the room flickered. A warning window popped up on the central monitor. At first, it was just a small red line of text. Then a cascade of notifications rained down. The tech lead shot up, his voice tense. "The system is automatically switching to lockdown mode. A process is triggering the white mechanism." Screens around the room flashed red. Critical servers began locking down access rights. Members of the tech team rushed to their desks, furiously typing blocking commands. But the more they blocked, the faster the deletion accelerated. It was as if the destructive software knew it had been detected and was rushing into a self-destruct phase.
Elise quickly moved closer to Aaron, trying to stay composed, but her breathing was noticeably shallower. "This could result in the total loss of all project data," she said, her eyes fixed on the screen. Aaron looked at the long streams of warnings, then at the system schematic. The destructive software wasn't attacking from the outside. It was spreading from within, from the driver update itself. It was dismantling data piece by piece like an invisible hand peeling fingernails from a finger. A programmer shouted across the room, "Data on the main cluster is starting to wipe. If it spreads to the backup cluster, we lose everything." The air in the room became compressed. Elise gripped the edge of the table, her eyes tracking every changing line of code. She tried to keep her voice steady as she urged the team to stop it at all costs, but clearly, the system was spiraling out of control. Aaron moved closer to the main screen, his eyes transitioning from the lines of code to the system map, as if they were pieces he had to quickly reassemble. Once again, he didn't speak immediately. He just watched, intently, like a craftsman examining an object slowly breaking apart in his hands. He leaned down, his fingers seeking the keyboard. A familiar sensation coursed through his arm, as if his body remembered the work before his mind could formulate the words. The entire room seemed to descend into stillness before the chaos. Elise watched every move, sensing that all remaining hope rested on the shoulders of the man standing before the screen. In Aaron's eyes, the lines of code were no longer confusing. They were signals, a rhythm. The way the destructive software operated, regularly, cyclically. If he could grasp that rhythm, he could interrupt it at its weakest point, but there wasn't enough time. The system warned that there were less than 3 minutes before all data would be locked and permanently deleted. A technical staff member cried out as another server shifted to white pending status. Elise turned back to Aaron, asking him with her eyes if it was still possible. Aaron didn't answer verbally. He simply placed both hands on the keyboard. The screen reflected in his eyes, bright and flickering, and in that moment, he was no longer the man who had left the engineering field 2 years ago. He was the person who once lived and breathed code, who understood how systems reacted when cornered. The system before him was in its final struggle. The space in the control room condensed into a heavy layer of pressure on everyone's shoulders. The alarms sounded continuously from the monitors, the red text stretching out like a sign that the system was being strangled with every passing second. Aaron stood directly in front of the central screen where the lines of code danced erratically, and while everyone around him was racing against the clock, he remained strangely calm. His heart was still fast, but his mind was clear in a way he had forgotten for too long.
Each deleted data packet, each server cluster shifting to lockdown status, pushed the entire corporation closer to collapse. Aaron understood this more than anyone. He looked at the status graph, seeing the data deletion speed double with every cycle. The destructive software had been activated, as if it knew the tech team had picked up its trail and was desperately trying to erase all remaining evidence. Aaron tracked the deletion rhythm. It was chillingly precise. Every 3 seconds, a batch of files was marked, then eliminated, like a final heart pulse trying to pump out its last reserve of energy before shutting down. Aaron began piecing together the data in his head, as if he were looking at the map of a battle where every wrong step meant the entire system would sink. He realized the destructive software wasn't deleting randomly. It was following the system's internal map, scanning cluster by cluster, partition by partition. If he could block its progression within the next few seconds, the entire system had a chance to survive. He recalled an old piece of code he had written for his previous company, a routine that forced servers into read-only mode upon detecting widespread system errors. That mode made it impossible for the server to write or delete data, allowing only reading access, which instantly blocked any self-destruct operation. At the time, he had written it merely as a simple precaution. He never imagined a day when that very piece of code would become the only thing powerful enough to keep an entire corporation standing. Aaron pushed his chair closer to the keyboard, his hands settling onto the keys as if they were an extension of himself. He looked at Elise for a split second. She stood a few steps away, gripping the edge of the table, her eyes caught between belief and fear. Without words, Aaron knew what she was waiting for. He input the command. A new window popped up. Override required. Aaron typed in the old code, the familiar signature he had noted in his personal files years ago. His fingers moved rapidly, typing with such precision that the tech team behind him could only watch in silence. Each keystroke blended with the escalating alarm sounds, creating a taut, high-tension rhythm. The system timer for white pending status dropped from 60 seconds to 45 seconds in less than 5 seconds. A programmer yelled out that a secondary server had begun the self-deletion process. Aaron didn't stop. He switched windows, adjusted the command sequence, forcing the system to perform an action it resisted in its chaotic state, locking all write permissions across all partitions in one massive activation.
A new warning window appeared. System resistance detected. Aaron bit his lower lip slightly. He accelerated, inputting the forced lock code. This mechanism could temporarily freeze the servers, but if he was lucky, it would put the entire system into safe mode before the destructive software could wipe everything clean. Lines of code raced down the screen. Red turned yellow, then flickered between the two colors. The system was fighting against itself. The countdown clock? 22 seconds. Aaron gently clenched his hands and hit the final key combination. The control room fell silent, so quiet they could only hear everyone's heavy, rushed breathing. The countdown clock? 15 seconds. Then 10, 9, 8. A sharp chime sounded. The screen flipped to a deep blue. A large line of text appeared in the center. Read-only mode enabled. Aaron let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The system around the room gradually stabilized, the warnings receding as if water draining from the sand. One programmer nearly cried with relief. The tech lead slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands. Elise looked from screen to screen, then straight at Aaron. The system had stopped the self-destruction process with only 7 seconds left. If he had been one beat slower, all the data would have been irrecoverable. Elise walked over to Aaron. She didn't speak immediately. Her gaze held a reverence Aaron wasn't used to receiving. She turned to the tech team, instructing them to cross-reference the marked files to trace the origin. The whole team immediately sprang into action, now energized as if they had just stepped back from the brink. A short while later, the evidence began to emerge. The destructive software originated from a device update sent by a vendor not on the regular list. The update contained the compromised driver, which secretly streams small data packets outward and prepared to wipe everything upon detection. Elise felt a chill run down her spine when she saw the vendor's name. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate operation, and if Aaron hadn't been there would have been nothing to stop her from watching her company disintegrate. When the tech team finished their summary report, Elise turned back to face Aaron. They stood a few steps apart, in a room still visibly marked by tension. "We've preserved all the evidence," Elise said, her gaze deeper than usual. "Thanks to you." Aaron wasn't sure how to reply. He simply nodded slightly, his hands still trembling slightly after the high-stress situation. Elise took a slow, deep breath, then continued. "We need you here, at least during the recovery phase. Temporary system security consultant position. You'll have full authority to audit, coordinate technical efforts, and propose solutions."
Aaron blinked, feeling as if the ground beneath him had shifted in a completely new direction. He hadn't expected to be repaid. He had only done what he knew he had to do, but this offer opened a door he hadn't dared to consider for ages. His life, and Leela's, could move on to a new chapter, starting now. And Elise knew full well, she had just found the only person who saved the future of her entire corporation. From the day Aaron accepted the temporary security consultant position, the office changed in a way no one expected. He worked flexible hours to drop off and pick up Leela, and somehow that made everyone more open. His daughter scooted around the workstations, asking all sorts of questions about computers and robots, even making the typically quiet staff members laugh. In an environment constantly tense with major projects, Leela's presence was like a warm breeze filtering into every corner. Aaron spent the majority of his time rebuilding the security framework after the operation. He proposed a new architecture where every data transmission left a clear trail, like light shining through clean glass. The concept thrilled the tech team, as it not only patched the flaws, but made the system exponentially stronger. Elise monitored the process daily, and every time she watched Aaron standing at the whiteboard, explaining each arrow and loop, she realized something she had always avoided. People couldn't navigate life purely by logic. In the middle of meetings, Elise often saw Leela rushing over to tug on Aaron's shirt, showing him a new drawing or recounting a school story. The way Aaron would bend down to listen to his daughter, patient and warm, made Elise pause occasionally. She recognized that balance was something she had lost years ago. Work had long consumed all the space inside her, to the point where she forgot what it felt like to be trusted without demanding anything in return. And through their discussions about technical issues, which gradually shifted to more personal topics, she realized Aaron was one of the few people who could make her drop her guard. As for Aaron, the seemingly inherent coldness in Elise turned out to hide a softness he hadn't expected. He sometimes caught her looking at Leela with an expression that was hard to decipher, as if she saw a part of herself in that innocence. Aaron knew he had stepped into a delicate space where all three of them were slowly finding each other without having to say a word. When the investigation concluded and the company system was completely stable, Elise called Aaron up to the rooftop. The evening sky cast a pale, golden light over the city, illuminating the high-rises and the intertwined roads below. They stood next to each other, not speaking right away. The wind made Elise subtly fold her arms, but Aaron stood close enough for her to feel secure. Elise looked toward the distant intersection where everything had begun. She never thought that accident would be the starting point for so many things. Aaron looked in the same direction, recalling the split-second decision to pull over. If he had chosen to keep going that day, to make his interview on time, his life and Leela's would likely still be stuck in that old room without an escape. In that silence, they both understood, without needing to say it, they had entered each other's lives exactly when they needed it most. And as they left the rooftop, heading back down to the life that awaited them, the future of the three of them, Aaron, Leela, and Elise, was brighter than ever. A future built not on luck, but on kindness, trust, and the right choices, even when no one else was watching.